There's a type of person often praised for having a high EQ, but in reality their behavior is cunning. They grovel like a dog in front of superiors, act like a tyrant with subordinates, and become sly and crafty when dealing with peers. They tend to say things like, "You're still young, you wouldn't understand. This is how life works. Wait until you're in my position or my age, then you'll get it. You've never suffered." In their words, they are always the hardworking, serious, and diligent one. They constantly try to teach others how things should be done, always attempting to assimilate you. Faced with this phenomenon, some people choose to ignore it, even feel disdain, thinking it's both ridiculous and pitiful. After all, work should be a win-win relationship, not one of flattery above and oppression below. Others choose to respond through attitude. This is the wave of Gen Z reforming the workplace. Some opt for debate, using logic and evidence to argue back, but end up caught in a futile battle of right and wrong. Then there's a special group, the abstract players. They instinctively reject this kind of environment but feel powerless to change it. They don't want to become like those fake EQ people, but sometimes in the current environment, they are forced to bow and compromise. Over time, the inner conflict, frustration, and dissatisfaction are resolved through sarcasm. They choose to play abstract, to self-mock and blur the issue as a way to release unspoken grievances. This is also why people nowadays feel connected to and fond of characters like Mr. Tu or Femme de Boo in comedy shows, because they resonate with the tragedy hidden behind the humorous facade, recognize the absurdity lying beneath the pain, and exclaim, "Everyone mocks them, but in truth, we are all like them, just in varying degrees." From that, abstract is no longer just a concept, but gradually becomes an adjective with a tone of self-mockery and helplessness, used to describe a common psychological state among today's youth. Looking deeper into the issue, you'll see those who use so-called high EQ to flatter upward and suppress downward are actually deeply lacking in self-recognition. They project their own shadow onto others in a selfish attempt to satisfy unmet internal needs. When we are forced to wrestle between being defined and resisting being defined, a deeper question is obscured. How exactly have they influenced us? Who are we? Why do we always feel like we are living under the expectations of others? That is the true topic this article wishes to discuss. You might find some of the terms in this article a bit abstract or hard to grasp, but don't worry. I'll do my best to explain them in simple language and real-life examples so you can comfortably follow along. To understand the concept of the personalized archetype that Jung proposed, we first need to grasp a few basic ideas in his psychological framework. Jung likens the human psyche to an iceberg. The visible part above the water is consciousness, the self we use in everyday life to understand ourselves and the world. The core of consciousness is the ego, responsible for processing external information, making decisions, shaping identity and social roles, helping individuals locate themselves in the world, understand why they exist, what they are doing, and what they need to do. However, most of the psyche lies beneath, in the unconscious. Unlike Freud, his mentor, Jung divided the unconscious into two levels, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious includes repressed experiences, emotions, and memories that have been pushed out of awareness, yet still subtly influence behavior and mood. For example, someone who was chased by a dog as a child might completely forget the event but still feels discomfort or fear when seeing a dog, without understanding why. This is a manifestation of the personal unconscious. The collective unconscious, on the other hand, is a transpersonal layer, a shared spiritual reservoir of humanity that contains archetypal images, symbols, and memories passed down through generations. Examples include fears like darkness, deep oceans, snakes, or spiders. Many people fear them despite never having encountered them. Jung believed these were results of evolution, psychological templates inherited from human ancestors that helped with warning, protection, and survival. From this collective unconscious, Jung proposed the concept of archetypes, instinctive psychological patterns and images present in all human minds. They are not specific behaviors, but deep templates that influence emotions, thoughts, and actions. For instance, a chick instinctively breaks out of its shell, a bird builds a nest, geese migrate south, a newborn knows how to suckle. All these are behaviors that require no teaching, originating from inherited instincts. These are vivid proof of the presence of archetypes in the minds of both humans and animals. One fundamental archetype is the compliant archetype, essentially the mask we wear when facing society. The mask is the outward image we present to adapt to environmental expectations. This isn't wrong, it's a survival instinct. But if we over-identify with the mask, we risk losing our true self, leading to alienation and inner fragmentation. This mask often forms in childhood under the influence of parents, teachers, peers, and society. Perfectionism and societal norms lead us to suppress our dark side. We fear revealing our imperfections and often avoid expressing emotions deemed negative, such as anger, jealousy, or dissatisfaction. On social media, we carefully construct a positive, cheerful persona. This creates a phenomenon. The authentic but unaccepted parts of ourselves gradually form another archetype, the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we reject, avoid, or are completely unaware of. It stems from both the personal and collective unconscious, and often stands in complete opposition to what we show the world, the social mask we wear. Simply put, everyone has a shadow in their soul, a denied, repressed personality containing negative emotions, condemned desires, work-related pressure, internal conflicts, unspoken love, hidden sexual orientations, or impulses that society has suppressed. However, the shadow should not be viewed one-sidedly as something purely negative. Where there is light, there must be darkness. The shadow is a natural balancing mechanism within the human psyche. If we overemphasize the light and try too hard to be perfect by rejecting our darker sides, we risk losing our wholeness, becoming tools of social gaze, and losing autonomy. At this point, you may ask, how does the shadow emerge? The answer is through projection. When you deeply dislike a trait in someone else, it's often something you've rejected in yourself. A highly rational person, for example, may feel annoyed by someone who shows too much emotion, which could be a sign they are suppressing their own emotions. This is how the shadow manifests. From here, the next step is learning to accept the shadow. Take the example of someone who's a chronic people pleaser. They often appear energetic, friendly, always accommodating, and strive to be perfect. This behavior might stem from a lack of love in their past, combined with being taught to always be gentle, obedient, and never angry. Such one-sided teachings cause the person to repress their true feelings, especially anger and dissatisfaction. They wear a charming, agreeable mask to gain acceptance and seek validation from others. But the more they do this, the emptier and more anxious they feel. They fear that if they reveal their true self, they'll lose the perfect image they've built. So they keep playing a role to live up to others' expectations. This is a form of fragmented personality when the self is entirely projected onto others' viewpoints. But eventually, the repression reaches its limit. The person starts to realize that constantly denying their own needs and emotions is destroying them. At that point, they begin to face the shadow and try to accept their dark side. This marks the beginning of the shadow transformation stage. The repressed energy is released, and negative emotions gradually become part of an integrated inner self. They learn to love their imperfect self, no longer needing to please everyone or overly humble themselves. They realize that being authentic doesn't make people reject them. In fact, it makes them more relatable and sincere. What's important to note at this stage is, this process is not about swinging from one extreme to the other. Moving from always pleasing to not caring at all is a misstep. Instead, people learn to find a balance between light and dark, between societal expectations and the natural self. Just as light cannot exist without darkness, we don't need to destroy one side but rather integrate both. For example, in everyday life, the concern over self-image on social media is a form of shadow. People craft a perfect online persona, which distances them from their true self. How many are brave enough to break free from that inner-outer disconnect and embrace their imperfect self? Because ultimately, the ideal self is the root cause of much insecurity. Similarly, those who frequently lecture others or attack people can also be manifestations of psychological imbalance, signs of an incomplete ego. Displays of arrogance or self-importance are often the subconscious compensating for past insecurities. In the repository of archetypes, there are two particularly special ones: the anima and animus, the feminine aspect within a man's psyche, anima, and the masculine aspect within a woman's psyche, animus. These represent the inner opposite gender within each person, existing in the unconscious and complementing the lived gender experience. Like the shadow, anima and animus also reveal themselves through projection. For instance, a man who lacks connection with his inner femininity may become captivated by strong, energetic women because he is subconsciously seeking traits he himself lacks. The feeling of love at first sight is often a projection of anima or animus onto someone of the opposite gender. It's important to understand, traits like independence and assertiveness, typically labeled masculine, or gentleness and empathy, often labeled feminine, do not belong exclusively to any gender, nor is one set superior to the other. Don't view this through a binary, oppositional lens. Labels like toxic straight guy or tough girl acting like a man actually reflect an imbalance in the integration of anima or animus. The healthiest approach is not to deny one side, but to harmonize both. A man who integrates his anima well will be both rational and decisive, while also empathetic and sensitive. A woman who harmonizes her animus will be strong and determined while retaining her inner softness. Looking back at everything discussed, it becomes clear this is not a binary or extreme way of thinking. The goal is not to reject one side and glorify the other, but to seek synthesis and balance. Human psychology cannot evolve without a dynamic interaction between consciousness and the unconscious. These two aspects should coexist dialectically, not in conflict. As previously mentioned, the root of development lies not in external forces, but in the internal contradictions of the self. Only when consciousness and the unconscious reach a state of dynamic balance can the process of individuation truly begin. And this process is not a static state, but an ongoing spiral evolution, increasingly deep and increasingly whole. This journey is called the process of individuation and movement toward the self.